Well, I want to thank you for inviting me, Les, and Donnie, and Chancellor and Governor Hunt for inviting me to be part of the Emerging Issues Forum. As a longtime attendee, I respect and appreciate what this institute has done throughout the years. We've got a great panel, and I want to introduce them to you. I want to start with Katharine Stevens, who is immediately to my left, your right. Katharine leads the American Enterprise Institute's Early Childhood Program. She focuses on research, policy, and politics of early childhood care and education, especially the role of early learning in expanding opportunity for low-income Americans and for challenges in early childhood initiatives. She was herself a preschool teacher in New Haven, Connecticut, has 20 years in the classroom in research studies and education reforms, has been widely published and interviewed, a PhD in education policy and MBA from Columbia University, along with a master's in education from Teachers College. Beside Katharine is Elaine Weiss, the National Coordinator for the Broader, Bolder Approach to Education, an organization that promotes comprehensive, evidence-based policies and case studies to allow children to thrive in school and life. Elaine has authored dozens of blogs. She's on TV and radio interviews, collaborated with researchers to assemble a body of evidence of benefits of early childhood investments, a PhD in public policy from George Washington, and a JD from Harvard Law School. Beside Elaine is Ralph Hise. Ralph is very well respected for his insights to those of us who talk about health care particularly. He co-chairs the Senate Health Care Committee, and the Appropriations Committee on Health and Human Services, as well as pensions and retirement. He got a degree in statistics from Appalachian State University and a master's in higher education from NC State, Chancellor Woodson. In the Senate, he serves Madison, McDowell, Polk, Rutherford, and Yancey counties. We were supposed to have a fourth panelist, former Representative Larry Hall, who has just been appointed the Secretary of Veteran and Military Affairs. We were informed a little while ago that Larry's tied up over at the legislature. He's getting ready to go through the confirmation process. He is hopeful to be able to join us very soon. I want to begin this afternoon with a story. It was the summer of 1992. Jim Hunt was running for an unprecedented third term as governor of North Carolina. He called the late Harlan Boyles, longtime treasurer for our state, to ask him a favor. Would Harlan be willing to go with him to New York, he asked, to get reacquainted with the financial heads of Wall Street, since Jim had been out of office for 8 years? Well, Harlan and I flew up separately from the governor, and on the way up, we were speculating on the plane about, wonder what he wants to talk to these guys about. Is this just a meet and greet? Is he asking them for support? Did he want to reassure them that if he was elected, the state's AAA credit rating would remain strong and that the financial position of the state would remain strong? Just what did he want to talk about? Well, over the next 2 days, we met with 6 or 7 of the leading people on Wall Street, heading up big finance houses on Wall Street. Now, it was absolutely amazing to us as we walked in for our first interview, and after the pleasantries were exchanged, Jim Hunt started talking to the CEO of Merrill Lynch about early childhood intervention. You can just imagine their surprise and their amazement during the course of this conversation when he wanted to talk to them about at-risk children, about getting a better foundation before they actually started school. And of course, we later figured out that that was the genesis for Smart Start. But some 25 years later, we're here today we're still talking about that topic that Jim Hunt introduced 25 years ago, and may be for some time to come. You've heard a lot of excellent presentations so far today, and some startling statistics and some alarming statistics for that matter, some good discussions about how we can better serve children. This panel is tasked with exploring the policy content of early childhood programming. We hope to cover the value of targeted versus universal approaches, the role of government and the private sector, and return on investment cost and benefits of early childhood program. So let's get started. And Elaine, I want to start with you. I think our audience would enjoy learning a little bit about what is the broader, bolder approach to education. What's your mission? What do you do, and how do you go about it?
So our mission, really in a nutshell, is first of all to call attention to the many ways in which growing up in poverty, both individually in a family and in a community of poverty, has impacts on education. And what are the most effective things that we can do at the district, state, and federal level to remove those impediments, i.e. really to weaken or even ideally break poverty education links. And early childhood fits into this obviously very, very directly and solidly, because we know that there are some key places in kids' lives where poverty has the biggest impact as posing a barrier. And the first of those is in those early years, when those formative experiences that we heard so much about here, brain development, serve and return, nurturing adult experiences, enriching experiences, are out of reach. They're out of reach for too many kids in our country. They're out of reach for their parents. And so one of the big things we focus on in BBA is making sure that all kids have that opportunity. I could rephrase BBA's mission as saying, we understand very fully that every child in this country is capable of doing great learning if given the right and the same opportunities.
Well, in studying your work, you wrote that the top-down pressure from so-called reform programs like Race to the Top, No Child Left Behind, have actually resulted in looking like sort of a new status quo rather than real reforms that have moved the needle. Tell us why.
So a big part of the problem is that those of us who've been in education a long time, and I'm not among them, but I've studied it, know that we've had this problem a long time, right? We had a Coleman report now 50 years ago. And if we had to nutshell the Coleman report, what James Coleman said, James Coleman was tasked with looking at what was going on in schools that was driving large, stubborn, race-based achievement gaps. Okay, he was a sociologist. And he came back and basically said, I was very surprised at what I found. Now, anyone who reads a researcher and the researcher says I was surprised at what I found should take that research pretty seriously, because few people admit that. But what he was surprised at was that most of what he was finding wasn't in schools. He said, really the big thing I'm finding is that kids who are coming from families growing up in poverty, who are growing up in communities of concentrated poverty, and who are growing up in racial isolation and bringing those factors to school, that's where the majority of the problem lies. So it's not that schools don't play a role, and we've certainly learned a lot since Coleman, in particular that schools, unfortunately in this country, rather than being the equalizers that we think of them as, and we sort of tolerate inequities because we believe that, tend to actually compound those inequalities that kids bring to school.
Katharine, you wrote in one of your articles, you cited a study that showed that 3-year-old children, and it was repeated this morning as a matter of fact, 3-year children of college professors had an average vocabulary of 1,116 words. Children from working class families had a vocabulary of 759 words, and children from welfare families a vocabulary of 525 words. Tell us how you interpret this data. What does it mean, and how does it play out for the development of children?
Well, I think that study that you're referencing, which was also referred to this morning, really underscores what I heard as the primary message of this morning's speakers, which is what I think common sense has told us for a long time, and the more recent brain science is making very clear, is that learning starts for children at birth. So the very first months and years of children's experiences are having a profound impact on their development. And for children, what that means is being at home with their parents, the experiences they're getting at home, and for these days a very large number of children, the experiences they're getting in childcare.
Senator, one of the things that so frequently happens is people look to government, they look to public schools, they look to educators and so forth like that. This study tells me that in early childhood development, an awful lot of the importance of that development takes place in the home.
It does. I think two things you see, not only is it taking place at home, it takes place at earlier ages. When you look at how a child's brain develops and how they pick that up, they're growing much faster as they approach a year-old and 2-year-old than they are when they approach 4 and 5 years old. But when you look at the funding of the state, we put all our money in the 4-year-old category. That's what's coming in. You look at that basic definition, if we look at early childhood development, we're spending the bulk of our money where we know it is least effective in the operations.
Well, Katharine wrote an article about this. In fact, she's got a book she just gave me about pre-K. We talked about the more at 4, and we showed some statistics earlier today that indicate it is moving the needle a little bit. Katharine, you say that if we're putting all our eggs in the pre-K basket, we're waiting too late.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is the case that there have been some very small improvements in, for example, kids' proficiency in 3rd grade reading between poor kids who went to pre-K and poor kids who did not go to pre-K. So, for example, 39% of the kids who were poor and did not go to pre-K were proficient in 3rd grade reading, and that was increased to 42% of poor kids who did go to pre-K. So that's from 39% to 42%. That's better than nothing. However, among non-poor children who went to pre-K, 62% were proficient in 3rd grade reading, and 73% of non-poor children who did not go to pre-K were proficient in reading. So what we're looking at is an achievement gap that's absolutely enormous, that has closed a very small amount by pre-K for poor kids.
Statistically, it's almost inconsequential, isn't it?
Well, statistically, it is consequential, and when researchers are reporting results, what they report is statistically significant results. The problem is that there's a real distinction between, an important distinction between statistically significant and policy significant.
I would disagree with some of that on a couple rounds. I think first of